Okay, I'm going to get started. Thank you and welcome to the attendees here. We really appreciate your spending this time with us. This being our very first webinar that is part of a series. We'll be holding them twice a month, and I'll show you in a second some of the speakers that are coming up. But we've got the cream of the crop here today. That's Fred Vallaeys, and I'm sure most of you know him, but I'll talk about him in a second a little more. I wanted to thank the sponsors that have contributed to making this happen: Microsoft, Closed Loop, and PPC Ad Editor. So thrilled to have Fred here. Fred, as most of you already know, is the founder of Optimizer, great PPC tools, former Google Ads employee, like one of the first ones. I'm sure you'll tell us a little bit about that. And prolific writer and speaker, and every word is a gem. Excuse me. So coming up in this order, in fact, I can probably tell you the dates here. Yeah, coming up in this order, you'll see we have a lot of well-known PPC experts that will be giving presentations, giving webinars. Anders Hjorth, Melissa Mackey. Anders will be on October 15th. Melissa is going to be on November 1st. Perna and AJ will speak jointly on LinkedIn, and that's on November 15th. Aaron Levy and Sam Tomlinson are doing what sounds like a really cool session, which is what they expect to see in 2022 or 2022. So that's Aaron Levy and Sam Tomlinson on December 6th. Then we've got Anders again with a different topic on January 4th. Adam Prohl on January 18th. Nava Fuchs February 1st, and Lisa Ressler February 15th. In order to see more about these and register for future ones, we'll direct you to a page that is not completed yet, unfortunately, but it will be soon. Best thing you can do to stay informed is join the Paid Search Association. We've recently made, for a limited time, membership free. So besides getting news about the webinars, you get a daily newsletter that contains the links to all of the most important articles and blog posts that have come out every day. And we have a very good mentorship program where you can be paired with some of the people that you saw on the previous screen, and others, especially on it from our board, who will spend time with you over the course of a month and help you understand or learn some advanced techniques. Okay, just one housekeeping thing. If you have a question at any time, use the Q&A button and submit your questions. So we'll accumulate those questions, and then about 15 minutes before the hour, we will start to feed those questions to Fred, and I'm sure that's going to be a really interesting part of the whole presentation. If you just want to say hello to us or someone else, the chat box is great for that. Also, well, say anything you want there. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Fred. Let's see. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. There we
All
go.
right, all right. Thank you, David.
You're welcome.
Thanks everyone for joining us today, spending an hour with us during your lunch or wherever in the world you are. Hopefully some of you are having a drink. It is 5 o'clock somewhere and it is Friday afternoon. So we're good. This is the inaugural session of the Paid Search Association webinars. And, hopefully I'll set the bar high here and you'll want to come back and see a couple of the other sessions. And it's really cool. I mean, these are free sessions and some of the speakers, if you're not familiar with them, these are the same people that you would see speak at SMX, HeroConf, all the conferences where you'd have to pay hundreds of dollars to get in and you'd have to travel somewhere. And I'm not going to lie, I'm kind of looking forward to getting back on the road and seeing people in person. But aside from that, the content that you're going to get through these sessions is going to be top notch. So keep on watching. But what I wanted to start out with here is a presentation called Unlevel the Playing Field, Making the Most of Automation in Google Ads. Okay, and so David told you that I'm an ex-Googler, so that's true. I joined Google back in 2002, specifically because I have a really special skill, that skill being that I speak Dutch. And Google at the time was looking for a Dutch speaker to help translate Google AdWords of the day into Dutch, which was going to be its fifth language, I believe. And so I was at Google as an employee. My badge number was 833, and that roughly equated to being one of the first 400-ish employees because all the temps and vendors, they also got badges. And so by the time I joined, it was about 400 people. I got to play roller hockey with Larry and Sergey in the parking lot.
Nice.
I got to hang out with them. I got to do really interesting things besides playing hockey with Larry and Sergey. But yeah, it was pretty cool being at Google. After 10 years at Google, I decided that there were some problems left unsolved and that were going to be easier to solve on a smaller team. So we started Optimizer, and we have PPC management tools, mostly geared towards PPC specialists, people who do this for a living and who just need to be more efficient. They know that you know what you want to do, but you just want to be able to do it faster. By the way, I was one of the 5 people on the founding team of the Google Ads editor. AdWords editor in the day. So I thought we'd done a pretty good job. But coming out of Google and building Optimizer was like, yeah, there's still a lot more we can do to make life really easy for PPC specialists. So 3 of those challenges that we're trying to solve at the company Optimizer, but 3 challenges that you probably encounter on a daily basis is number 1, automation. No matter whether you like automation or not, it's just this relentless wave that keeps coming and growing. And it's funny because I just put in my submissions for like the big trends for PPC in 2022. And I'm like, well, it's going to be automation again, right? So it's kind of like not this trend anymore. It's kind of this continuing wave. But I think it is going to remain one of the biggest topics that we need to figure out in PPC in the next year.
Hey, Fred, can I break in for a sec?
Yeah.
I'm seeing on my screen information about Zoom. Is that what you're intending to show?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Maybe switch screens.
Yeah,
there we go. Perfect.
That's better.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you didn't see all the beautiful slides about me and pictures of myself. It's okay, let's get into the good stuff. So anyway, this relentless wave of automation, a couple of things are driving it, and you've all heard about Moore's Law, right? Moore's Law says that every 2 years, roughly, computing power doubles. Also, the amount of data that Google has access to keeps growing exponentially, and I've plotted both of these on a chart. And so this is from Google's own stats about how many searches happen on their search engine every year. But you put that all in context of the day that artificial intelligence was invented, which was back in 1956, give or take. And so since 1956 and today, there's been roughly 27 times that computing power has doubled. And if you keep doubling computing power 27 times, like that sort of exponential growth is just mind-blowing. And that's why in the last couple of years, we've seen so much of the automation become so powerful. It's that combination of the huge computing power with a tremendous amount of data that Google has, with the fact that you put machine learning, which is a subset of artificial intelligence, you put those 3 together and you get things that are better PPC automation. Okay, so back to the slides here. So the other reason that automation is going to continue to grow is that Google Ads is no longer easy. Back in the day when I joined it, it was literally you buy a keyword, you write an ad, you do a little bit of geo-targeting, you set a bid, and you're off to the races. And there wasn't really that much complexity to think about. Like if you wanted to add another keyword, well, you just added another exact match keyword, and broad match existed, but there were no close variants. So everything was tightly controlled. And nowadays, Google says this themselves, but every single auction, every single search that happens, there's 500,000 signals that Google looks at to determine which ad to show for a search. And when it comes to the display network, it's even more. It's 70 million signals and combinations of signals that Google is thinking about. And they're doing this in less than a second because that's how much time they have to decide which ads to show on the page. And so there's just no way that we as humans can keep up with these 70 million combinations. And even if we knew how to keep up setting settings for 70 million combinations, like we just spend all of our time just dialing these things in as opposed to thinking about marketing and how we connect to our prospective consumers. So that's why we need automation. Now, automation is also quite popular. So we did a study at Optimizer and we looked at usage of responsive search ads. And we noticed that roughly 75% of the 5,000 or so accounts that we looked at were using RSAs. Okay, so out of that set, the 4,200 accounts that were using RSAs, only 17 of those had turned it off, right? And RSA is an automation, and there's automation at different levels, right? But RSA is basically Google figures out how to combine your headlines and your descriptions into the best performing ad for any single search. So that's an automation. Only 17 out of 4,200 accounts had this feature turned off. So that tells us that either advertisers are lazy and they're not paying attention and they just turn stuff on and never turn it off, or the more likely story, which is it actually works pretty well for them, so they're happy to keep it and they keep optimizing it. And here's another illustration of this. So we did a study together with Google looking at the conversion rate by spend bucket for advertisers at different spend levels. Okay, and this was for advertisers using smart bidding. And so if you use smart bidding on a small account that's spending less than $1,000 a month, those red bars, that's the conversion rate for smart bidding. It's much, much higher than conversion rate for manual bidding. Okay, and that makes sense because usually small accounts are not that well managed. And there's also not that much data. So Google can take its aggregate of data and probably do a better job of making those work well than a human can. In the middle of the range, there's not that much difference. So if you spend somewhere between 15,000 and 1,000 per month on Google Ads, then we see that roughly the conversion rate is the same between manual bidding and smart bidding. And that's probably because these are the accounts where you do pay enough attention to really make them work well. But there might also not be that amount of tremendous data that Google can do amazing things with machine learning. Now, if you look at the really big accounts, again, smart bidding really beats manual bidding. And here I think the story is that there is so much more data that the machine learning is just thriving and figuring out ways to drive up the conversion rate. So this illustrates that, by and large, PPC advertisers do seem to get benefits from automation, and that's why it's going to keep on coming. Now, the other challenge that we face in PPC is that the access to data, right? So we're control freaks in PPC. We like knowing what's happening, and we like to take action based on that. Now, about a year ago, Google decided to take away a lot of the search query data. And advertisers were up in arms about this. There was Will Reynolds, was Matt Umbro, so two big names in PPC. They both did studies on their own data. And what the chart on the right illustrates is what percentage of searches of cost was becoming invisible to advertisers. And so the way that this was done was basically to say, well, let's look at the overall cost of the account, and let's look at the cost that I can see from my search terms report. And that cost in the search terms report was much lower. And that meant that Google was hiding a lot of the search terms data. And so from one day to the next, it went from, a couple percentage points of data not being visible to as much as 30+% being hidden. You cannot make decisions if you don't have that data. And so that was really frustrating to advertisers. By the way, I write a lot of scripts. So on some of these slides, you're going to see a link to a script. If you want to run this analysis for yourself, grab that link. I also have the links on the final slide, and we're happy to send out the links to everyone who was registered for today. Okay, so advertisers complain. Good news. Very recently, Google reversed course, and they said, actually, we're going to give you the data back. And so we ran that same script to look at the impact. And you see that big drop right there And I guess you can see my mouse on the slides, but right here, this big drop, that's basically when Google restored the data. And it was nice because Google restored the data in September, but they did it all the way back historically to February. So all of a sudden, all of these searches became exposed. Now, there's actually a couple of downsides to this. Google shows much more data than they ever did before. And so, fun little fact, when we do an optimizer recommendation on search query data, we now pull as much data as watching an HD movie on Netflix. That's the amount of data. Now, the downside of this is we've seen advertisers talking on Twitter, and they're like, well, I'm getting all of these searches with emojis and in foreign languages that I'm not targeting. But all of this is zero click data. So there's no cost associated with it. And it is fascinating, right? Because you don't necessarily need to do an optimization when you're not spending money on it. But all this additional data can point you in the direction of like, why am I getting so many foreign language queries? Like, did I set my language targeting incorrectly? Or is there something else going on based on audiences that I didn't do correctly? But there's just a lot more data, and that becomes a challenge in and of itself. So it's like, we're pissed when there's not enough data, but we also like sometimes struggle to figure out when there's so much data, how to make sense of it as individual advertisers. And a lot of these things in that search query thing, specifically, that was driven by the fact that privacy concerns on the internet are really getting much more significant. And so Google has this initiative called the Privacy Sandbox. And through that, they want to have an open set of standards for making the web more private, but still preserving capabilities for advertisers. And this makes sense, right? I mean, Google makes so much money, $100 billion plus annually from advertising. If audience signals go away, all these third-party cookies, like that's a big portion of how you show more relevant ads to the right audience. And more relevant ads are ads that advertisers want to pay more money for. So this is really important. But there's another aspect to this that I thought was really fascinating. So Google did this study, and they said if third-party cookie technology were to disappear and no alternative solution is offered, how much revenue would newspaper publishers lose? And newspapers, I'm not talking about the print copy, I'm talking about newspapers online. Well, 62% of their revenue would go away. That could be the end of free journalism, the way that we have it today, where we can go to these websites for free. And that's really problematic, right? Because the internet is democratic. All of us, we can go and read free content because we have a social contract on the internet that in exchange for my attention and me reading something, you get my attention to serve me an ad about something that I might be interested in. If you break that social contract, the web starts to become broken, and the only people who can have access to journalism are the ones who can afford a subscription. Pay money for the Wall Street Journal, for example. That's not everyone, right? And that's problematic because we have come to a world that really depends quite heavily on this social contract of advertising on the web. And now, in terms of the lack of data is concerning because Google does make decisions that are questionable. Here is what Google considers to be close variant matches of exact match keywords. So an exact match keyword is no longer exact, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But Google literally says, if you as an advertiser have the keyword flower arrangement, that could match to a query like arranging flowers. I mean, it's kind of similar, but if I search for flower arrangement, I'm probably looking to buy it. If I'm looking for arranging flowers, I'm probably looking for how to do it myself, right? Commercial, not commercial. Should these be the same cost? Should these both be keywords that your ad shows up for when you specifically said it was an exact match, right? It's fine if it's a broad match, but you said it was an exact match, so that's problematic. Another one, this one came from Brad Geddes, but Google, according to his stats, think that logo design is basically the same meaning as trademarking. I mean, for one, I need a lawyer. For the other, I need a designer. Okay, not exactly the same. And that's why we need data, because we need to see what Google's machine learning is doing, and we need to be able to control it. We need to be able to put in negative keywords here and there. And then advertiser control is going to be reduced, and that's kind of a side effect of having less data, right? And so I was talking about this keyword match type. I don't know how many of you have been doing advertising for more than 5 years, but exact used to mean exactly that. It was an exact keyword, so your ad would show when the query was exactly the same. But now exact can show for things that, according to Google, mean the same thing. So that's been diluted. Phrase match used to mean that your words had to be in the same order for the ad to show. Well, Google said that's no longer the case. Your words can appear in any order, so long as it still roughly means the same thing. Modified broad match, that's a luxury we used to have where we could say this specific word must be in the query, otherwise I do not want to show my ad. That's gone, that disappeared this year. Broad match, Google sings the praises of it, and I keep laughing, and David, you must, and Lisa, but how many times have we heard that 15% of searches are new? Every time Google makes a change to match types, it's like, oh, but 15% of searches have never been seen before. That's the same stat we were saying back in the late 90s, right? So it just, one of these stats, I don't know that it's actually true anymore, but that is apparently the reason we keep having these match type changes. The other thing, if you all read Search Engine Land and keep up with the Google blogs, you've probably seen this, but just a few days, about a week ago, Google announced a change to ad serving priority. Again, this speaks to the lack of control. If I have an exact match keyword in the account and I have a broad match keyword, and the user goes and does a search for the exact same words as my exact match, I probably want to show my ad that I've written specifically for that keyword, where my landing page is specific to that keyword and my bid is for that keyword. Well, Google says, no, we're not going to do it that way. They haven't done it like that for a long time. So one recent innovation they said is, if we're not going to use your exact match, at least we're going to make sure that the broad match we put in instead is not just a higher ad rank, but is also relevant. So we're going to use machine learning to look at relevant queries. But again, the basic message of this is the keywords you choose have very little bearing on which ads are going to be shown. It's still going to be Google's decision. It's got to be relevant. It's got to have a good ad rank. And you can read all the details in there. But this is why you really need a strategy of evaluating queries and then saying, okay, maybe there's multiple queries that could match to, or multiple of my keywords that can match to these queries. You want to do traffic sculpting, right? You want to maintain negatives to steer Google to what you know is working the best. Because what works best from your perspective and Google's perspective isn't always the same. And that's problematic. That's where things start falling apart. And we'll talk about how you fix that in just a couple of slides. This slide, I'll give you a second to do a screenshot of it, but this is basically how keyword match types work nowadays. It's very complicated. Right? I love the old days when I could show this in a slide with like 5 words, but it's no longer 5 words because there's so much nuance. So grab a screenshot and then I'll move on. Okay, so at the end of the day, we got these 3 factors: more automation, less data, fewer controls. So what does that give us? Well, if you ask Google, we're all happy. It's advertising that works for everyone, right? And that's kind of true. I mean, with this automation, it makes advertising more accessible to people who are not advertising experts. Now, you all joining me on this webinar, you're advertising experts, or if you're not yet, you're here because you want to become one, because that's your job, right? But there's many people who just know they should be doing advertising on the internet and do Google ads, but they have no interest in learning it. They just do it because they know it's a good source of additional customers. And so, yes, Google is right. They're making it easier for that class of advertiser. But if you're a PPC expert, we're not exactly thrilled with most of these changes. Now, the good news is, even when everything's being automated, experts can still win. It's just we kind of have to have a big mind shift here. And I'll tell you what that mind shift is in just a second. But here's kind of an illustration. So this was a study done by Boston Consulting, and they looked at advertisers' performance. So it's this gray bar here on the bottom. This is the impact that you get from adding advanced technology. So if you switch to responsive search ads and you switch to smart bidding and you use automation from Google, you roughly see a 20% lift in your performance. Now, if you leave it at that, that's fine, you get a lift. But if you use human inputs on top of that, and you actually figure out how to optimize the automation, you get another 15% lift. And that's the opportunity for all of us here, right? This, as PPC experts, we get paid to make accounts better. And so there is still this opportunity for humans plus machines to outperform the machines alone. Now, what does that mean? And I got a bit of a wonky build here, so I'll just go through it. But on the left side of the slide, you see this is the stuff we used to manage, or we're used to managing, to manage a Google Ads account. We manage keywords, ads, demographic bid adjustments, device bid adjustments. There's a ton of stuff we manage. It's a lot of detail. But ultimately, why do we manage these things? We manage these things because our boss, our company, or our client, if we're an agency, what they want to get out of this, they don't care about keywords and bids. They just want to get more leads, sales, and signups. But actually, that's not even true. Like, I run Optimizer. I love leads, but I don't measure my business based on leads. I measure my business based on new customers, right? So they have to be high quality leads who actually convert. If you do sales, well, you want sales that don't get returned. If you do signups of a newsletter, well, ultimately there's probably a revenue component to that as well. So that's really what we care about. And for the longest time, we've used the stuff on the left to try to get to the stuff that's on the right. Now, here's the change that's really going to have to happen is flip it around. You need to be managing how you report value, how you provide structured data to Google. When everything's becoming more automated, what's critical is you telling Google, what is it that you truly care about achieving? And then Google can take its magic and its machine learning and put that on top of all the things that we used to manage very manually. That's when things start to work. If you just flip the switch and you say, I kind of know in the back of my head what conversion means to my business. And I haven't really reported that exactly correctly to Google. And now from one day I go from manual bidding to smart bidding. Well, guess what? You're not going to see good results because Google is using its automation technology to try and achieve the thing that you haven't really defined to it. And that's very difficult, right? So I think for us, the opportunity is managing the stuff on the left, the structured data, the value reporting, and then Google can do the optimization. Now, I've been talking about automation and AdWords scripts for like a decade now. And then I started realizing, I was writing these scripts to make my account management easier, but at some point I started managing or spending just as much time to make sure my scripts weren't breaking, to put settings in my script, to install scripts in more accounts as I was managing those accounts before. So all this automation, it's appealing, but it's also really time consuming if you don't do it right. And then I started thinking about leverage these automations from Google. They're really good. They use the best in class artificial intelligence. What if I can take my human process of managing these things and write it down, tell my own friendly little robot, my white robot that oversees Google, how to do things for me. And that's what we call automation layering. And so automation layering, you can see a few examples here, right? So as an advertiser, you bring your expertise to control the structure of your account because you have certain business drivers that require a certain structure, or to monitor the performance to make sure that smart bidding is hitting your actual business goals. Or you're trying to teach the algorithm about some aspect of your business that's unique that it needs to take into account to drive better results. If you do that manually, it's a lot of time, but if you use tools like Optimizer or like automated rules, which are free inside of Google, or if you use a script, which you can write or copy in many cases for free as well, or you use new automation layers from Google like conversion adjustments, all of that feeds into smart bidding and it makes that system better, right? But the challenge is that we've spent so many years worrying about negative keywords and bid management, manual bid management, that for some advertisers, it's hard to make that mental leap to saying, okay, well, let Google figure out most of that. Let me go and shift it to these other things that really make Google's automation that much better. So let me give you a few tips on specifically what you could go and do. Right. So I'm always kind of amused when people say automated bidding is fantastic because I set it and forget it. That is not the case. Automated bidding does one thing. It figures out the likely conversion rate from a click, or it figures out the value that's going to come from that conversion on that click. And so that depends whether you're doing CPA or ROAS bidding. But that's its job. It makes predictions about conversion rate and conversion value. That is not full automation. There's a lot more automation you need to do. And just to equate it to manual CPC, well, manual CPC, that was a target CPC bid strategy. Now we have a target cost per acquisition bid strategy. But how you dial that in, where you set your target, really determines the volume that you get, the number of sales that you get, right? And so if you ask yourself the question, what is my target going to be? If you set a really high target return on ad spend, that's fantastic. You're going to be optimizing for higher profit per sale, but you might not get very many sales, right? On the x-axis, you have very low sales. because you're too aggressive on wanting a high profit for every conversion. Now, if you set a really low target return on ad spend, you get the opposite. You might get tons of conversions, but you might start cutting into your profitability. And so your mission now is to figure out what is the right level. And the right level usually tends to be in the middle. But to find that sweet spot where you're maximizing the thing you want to maximize takes a little bit of effort of testing. By the way, if you do experiments in Google, Optimizer just came out with a great new experiment dashboard that puts all your experiment data on a single page. Is like 100 times faster than doing the same thing in Google Ads. So I'm really excited about that. The next thing that you really need to worry about that you can do specifically to work better with bid automation is figure out the right attribution model. So first of all, do not use last click attribution. Last click attribution is bad. And I'll tell you in a second why. But use something else. Time decay, it's pretty close to last click, but it also values things that happen earlier in the conversion funnel, right? The problem with last click attribution is that you only value the thing that comes out at the end. And that's completely fine if you do everything in your account manually, because say that you're Adidas and your upper funnel keyword is something like sneakers, right? People search for sneakers and eventually they start getting more specific and then they look for a specific type of sneaker in a specific size. Then they click, then they convert. So you get no conversions on sneakers, but it does drive traffic down that funnel. If you're on last click attribution and you use something like smart bidding is not smart. Smart bidding is completely dumb. It says, oh, Fred said that we should use last click attribution. So the only thing that drove value was that specific search for a specific sneaker in a certain size. The keyword sneakers, that didn't drive any conversions. So let's give up on that. Let's bid down on it. Well, guess what? If you narrow the investment in the upper funnel, it gets narrower and narrower. And eventually all the sales that come out at the bottom are also going to dry up, right? That's why last click attribution is so dangerous when you use it in combination with any form of automation. Now, there are five now attribution models. There's basically 4 that are rules driven. These are cool. This is what we used to have, but really great news from Google just like 2 or 3 days ago. Data driven attribution, it used to have a really high threshold for how much data you needed. That is gone. Now it is available to every advertiser, and Google's using its machine learning magic to figure out how to drive more conversions with data-driven attribution. This is going to become the new default starting in October of this year. So any new conversion action that you set up, by default, it will now be data-driven attribution. If you're still running on last click, it might be a good time to evaluate that and consider making a change. Now, why is data-driven attribution so exciting? It's because it doesn't care about hard-coded rules about the position. So in this example, there's 2 scenarios of searches happening. In this first one, people search for best tech gifts, top-rated phones, and then Google Pixel 4. In the next set of queries, the next user doesn't do that search for the Google Pixel 4. Now, Google can measure that adding this one particular search takes the probability of a conversion from 2% to 3%. So this specific search has a 50% boost to the probability of conversion. And Google doesn't care in what position it happens, right? In a rules-based attribution model, Google would potentially say that top-rated phones was the really valuable keyword in the mix. But no, Google can start to figure out that top-rated phones, it's a good keyword, but Google Pixel 4 is actually much more important in lifting your conversions. Right? So it assigns more weight to that, regardless of what position in the sequence of events that it shows up in. So it's much better. And this is a machine learning model that's per advertiser. So that's kind of cool as well. It looks at your patterns, not just everybody's. And then based on that, it starts to bid at the right level. Now, when you talk to Google, Google often says, when you have automation, forget about granularity, like just put everything in the same campaign. We'll figure it out, right? That's fine, you can do it, but you don't have to do it. A lot of people hear Google say this and they think that's what you absolutely must do. That's not the case, because conversion data comes from everywhere. So, and a lot of people don't realize this, but say that you have 3 campaigns that you've put on automated bidding, all of these get conversions. And so you figure that it's really these 3 campaigns that are driving the decisions about bid management. But that's not the case, because the same conversion action is driving 16 conversions and 9 conversions for these 2 campaigns that are on manual bidding. But Google doesn't care about the bid management. Google cares about the conversion data. And if these 2 campaigns drive conversion data, that is going to be used by Google to predict the likeliness of these 3 automated bidding campaigns driving more conversions. So what you do in one part of the account impacts another part of the account because Google cares about the conversion action. They don't care about your campaign structure. So that also means then that you are actually free and you're encouraged to put in a campaign structure that makes sense for your business, right? And so when you think about manual CPC bidding, right, in the old days, you might have set CPC bids at the keyword level. You cannot set target cost per acquisition or target return on ad spend at the keyword level. That exists at the ad group level and the campaign level. And when it comes to Microsoft ads, it only exists at the campaign level, I believe. And I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure, right? So, but think about how should I structure my campaign? Well, if you have 3 product categories here, and you know they have different margins of profitability, you might want to set a different target return on ad spend for each of these. So if you have a high margin product line, you can get away with a lower target return on ad spend, which is going to drive more volume, but it's also fine because every sale you make is a lot of profit. So it's okay to spend more money to get these sales. Whereas something that has a low margin, you would have to set a higher return on ad spend just to break even, right? So this is a completely smart way to optimize smart bidding. And then you can also do this to support business initiatives. Okay, so if you sell Easter decoration, patio furniture, and car accessories, there's seasonality to this. So, you know, up until Easter, you might want to have a really high return on ad spend target before Easter, but then afterwards, maybe you flip it around, right? Because you're willing to liquidate some of these products. So that's how you can also use business data. Now, in this slide, the thing we just talked about was setting your categories, your grouping of campaigns, so that you can have different target returns on ad spend. The other half of the equation that you need to think about is how do you report conversion data, right? So you need to optimize how you tell Google what actually happens to a conversion. So there's a couple of mechanisms that Google makes for that, and that falls into the bucket of value-driven optimizations. Okay, so the first one is called offline conversion import. It's been around for a long time. It's complicated because what you have to do is whenever a conversion click happens, you have to capture the gclid, the Google click ID, which Google passes as part of the URL string. And you have to put it into your CRM system or into your backend and your database. And so at this initial stage, when the user requests some info, you set a conversion. You tell Google, yeah, we got a conversion. So in my case for Optimizer, that'd be somebody signed up for a trial, that became a conversion. Now, because I captured the gclid and I put that with that trial user, if the trial user later on is really engaged and they go through a demo of the product and later on they actually pay for the product, they subscribe, I can report back to Google and I can say, hey, this gclid actually led to new conversion actions. And these conversion actions are more valuable to me. And by telling Google these more valuable things, its smart bidding and its automations can say, oh, actually, Fred doesn't care just about leads. He cares about subscriptions. So it can start to find more subscriptions automatically. Now, I'm always surprised. A lot of e-commerce advertisers don't realize there's an easier version of doing the same thing for e-commerce. And that's called conversion adjustments. So just look for the documentation on Google. But basically what you do is when a sale happens, you put in a unique transaction ID. And that's whatever ID you want. You just have to make it unique for every transaction. And then later on, if that customer returns part of the order, you can adjust the value by taking out the stuff that was returned. Or you can adjust the value to actually just report your profitability as opposed to the basket value. Or if you notice that this customer has all the attributes of being a high lifetime value customer, you can boost that value. You can say, hey, Google, this was a really good new customer that you found me. I want to put more value on that. And then the smart bidding system says, oh, Fred really liked that. So let us go and find automatically more of that type of customer, right? Because it drives a higher value. And then there's the third one, the easiest to use, which is value rules. And here you can say, based on the audience, the geolocation or the device, whenever I notice that a conversion came from one of these three categories, I want to adjust it up or down. And the simple example is this. So it's not about telling Google about conversion rate to like a lead, but it's basically saying, again, in my example, if somebody signs up for a trial of Optimizer from the United States versus India, I know that our software is more affordable to the average American company than the average Indian company. So I know that that trial sign up is more likely to convert to someone from America. So what I can do is I can set a value rule that says, even though I value every trial sign up at $100, I want to increase that value if I notice that trial came from the United States, and I want to decrease it if it came from India. And so you can do this based on locations, based on audiences, and you can see some examples here. But this is a really good way to, again, steer the smart bidding automation system into the direction that actually matters for you. And again, don't use your conversion rate data if you already passed that on to Google, but use this for the things that are harder to communicate. Stuff like lifetime value, stuff like basically lifetime value. So how valuable is this customer going to be down the road? As far as optimized targeting, right? So if you are doing some of these automations, Google advises that you remove some of your limitations on targeting. So if you have target cost per acquisition bidding, remove the zip code limitation, remove the, get rid of exact match and put in broad match instead. Because all of those things just give the automation a bigger playing field to try to get the traffic that actually works for you. Now, as far as targeting, one thing that I really do like to do is look for anomalies. So COVID-19 really showed us that behavior of consumers can change very drastically from one day to the next. You can write a script that automates the tedious process, and it can literally say, okay, show me a list of searches that have more than 100 impressions this week, but 0 impressions the week before. So these are my new trending impressions, the things that maybe I didn't realize people are searching for. So it tells me, hey, make some new ad groups, make some new ads for this, or maybe it's something I want to cancel out. Like, if I'm a travel vendor and people search for cancel my trip, that didn't used to be a high volume search, but all of a sudden it is. I don't want to pay for that. Make it a negative keyword, right? So you want to look for these trends and anomalies. The other thing, remember how we talked about exact match no longer being exact? So what Google does in the range of close variance is they use machine learning to say, what is the probability that a query is the same meaning as the underlying exact match? And as you look at that expanding bubble, the redder it gets, the further away that query is from the original meaning. And so that might be less relevant to you. Now, the problem is Google gets to set the threshold for what they consider to be good enough. So they draw that red line. But what if you as an advertiser, you want to be a little bit more conservative and you want to draw your own line within that bubble? Okay, here's what you do. You write a script, and I've written the script for you so you can grab it on that URL, but it basically spits out a report for exact match, close variance, and it adds this really cool calculated metric, which is called the Levenstein distance. So it does a character comparison, and it says your keyword is 50% different from what Google showed your ad for. And now you can set a threshold, and you can say, if it's more than 30% different, I want to look at it. Or I don't even want to look at it. I'm just going to make it a negative, because you know what? I said I wanted that as an exact match keyword. Google's not respecting that. So boom, I make it an automatic negative keyword. So these are ways that you can work together with the automation to make it perform better. Now, another thing to look out for, Google recently introduced optimized targeting. Look out for it, because this is automatically going to be turned on in accounts as Google launches more of it. But I actually quite like it, because it uses machine learning to find new conversions. Now, people often confuse this with audience expansion, which has existed since 2019. Now, see, here's how targeting works, right? So there's every person in the world in the big box. And then my targeting determines who of those people my ad can show to. And audience expansion, what it does is it looks at your audience targeting and it says, let's find similar audiences to that, right? So someone who's interested in automotive might also be interested in SUVs or sports cars or car racing. So it tries to find like these pockets of similarity. Now, what optimized targeting does is it says, actually, let's flip that upside down. Let's look at the people who have converted on your conversion actions, and let's figure out what are the commonalities between those people: behavior, interests, demographics. And then it goes and finds new pockets of people with similar attributes. And now that system can go and find new potential conversions that have nothing to do with your existing targeting, because you didn't realize maybe that some of the people who buy a lot of your stuff have certain attributes in common, right? And this is not defined by your targeting. This is defined by Google understanding personas and people. Okay. So the last section here, optimizing your messaging and ads. This is one thing that always surprises me, but have you ever tested an A/B test where you have exactly the same ad as your A and your B? So it's basically an AA test. You will find a winner and a loser. Okay, why do you find a winner and a loser? Well, it's not because the ad is different, but it's because it's in an ad group, and the ad group triggers ads to different people. And those different people have done different things. So when you're doing ad testing and when you want to get deeper, you want to beat all of your competitors and do a better job at optimizing, you got to go that level deeper. You got to say, well, okay, for these two ads, they were the same, but who was the ad shown to? So was the thing that made one a winner and a loser, was it actually the search query that you showed up for? Or were it some audience attributes? So you got to really think about your optimizations and go that level deeper to find those nuggets of insight that help you beat the competition. Now, you can also use Google's own information. So if you do a search on Google for something like how to fix a leaky toilet, Google says people also asked for how do you fix a slow leaking toilet? Why is my toilet leaking into the bowl? The first organic result is how to fix it yourself. Okay, these are insights. If I'm writing responsive search ads, if I know that the sort of the mental state of someone doing this search is, I want to fix it myself, maybe my RSA ad says, fixing it yourself is messy, call the pros. Okay, so you've just spoken to the condition that user is in, and maybe you've actually given the RSA ad a better ad component to try to get that consumer to call you and use your business. Now, we also did a study. We're going to have a whole revamp of this study coming up at SMX Next, which is happening. I'm speaking on November 9th. You can sign up for that. But we looked at all the data and we noticed that RSAs generally outperform ETAs. So when you let Google do the automated ads instead of writing the ads yourselves, they usually have better performance on everything we look at. Now, the question was then, should I use the pinning capability? If you use spinning, generally your ad is going to perform worse than if you just let Google figure it out. So that's what the stats show. Now, one thing, you probably never heard of this. Okay, there we go, the slide's showing. I didn't realize this, so maybe you did. But did you know you can pin multiple components to the same position in an ad? See, I always thought that pinning was about saying my headline one needs to say exactly this. Google at some point changed that. They said you can pin 3, 4, 5 different components to headline one. And now basically you can do an ad test of 5 different variations in headline one, but it gives you control because now you know in headline one, I'm running 5 variations on my brand. And headline 2, I'm running 5 variations on my promotion. And that is going to teach me how to better optimize my ad. And so we have some early data from that. And so if you use multiple variations to pin, you will perform better generally than if you just do one pin. That said, it's about on par with not doing any pinning. But if you want to pin, do multiple variations because that is going to improve your results. Okay, so with that, I think I'm about at my time. So the final takeaway here is automation, it's there. It can be scary. When I was at Google, I helped with the acquisition of a company called Urchin, which is nowadays called Google Analytics. And people in the industry, they were freaked out when Google went and bought Urchin and made it free because they thought we were going to kill the analytics industry. The opposite happened. And Hal Varian, who's the chief economist at Google, he basically, in the context of Google Analytics, he said, complement, don't compete, seek to be an indispensable complement to something that's getting cheap and plentiful, right? Analytics was becoming cheap and plentiful. The same thing with automation and PPC. These tools from Google, they're free. They're everywhere. In many cases, you have to use it, right? So don't figure out how to fight against it, but figure out how to work with it and make it better. And that's going to help all of us perform better in the industry, keep our jobs, and have long and happy careers in PPC. So with that, if you want to reach out, there's my Twitter handle, links to a bunch of the scripts we shared, and I would love to see if we had any questions. David, I'm not looking at the questions, so if you can tee me up.
I could offer one.
Let's go, Mike.
Okay, I'm wondering, in the past, quality score was based strictly on click-through rate, different formulas, different aspects of click-through rate. But there's been so much advances in natural language processing. Is that yet applied to quality scores, or is that going to happen soon?
Yeah, I mean, when I was on the quality score team, it really was, it was the wisdom of the crowds, right? So it was how engaging is this ad to someone who did that specific search? And the easiest way to measure that and not have Google make those decisions was based on click-through rate. It used to be pure click-through rate in the beginning, then it started evolving and it was taking into account other relevance factors and things like landing page, load times. So a lot of that has come in. And here's the funny thing, right? So relevance, semantic relevance doesn't necessarily mean that it resonates with the user. So you get these funny pockets where unexpected things actually get the user to click more. And that is a really strong signal. That could be unexpected, but that's still what you want to look at. I do think the fact that, the whole matching change where Google is now looking at is not purely ad rank, but we must also enforce relevance between the two. I think that's kind of where they're starting to use it first. And then we'll see if it's, probably will go into quality score as well. But I don't think it should be the overriding factor. That's a good question.
I've got one as well. It's tangential to what we've been talking about a little bit, but one of the reasons I love to read everything that Fred writes and others like Brad Geddes is that not all automation is inherently good. In other words, and Fred gave some examples. My favorite example these days is performance max campaigns. So as Fred said, Google is trying to provide tools and features to advertisers that are not expert so that they can get results even if they don't have the time or expertise. So thank you for that, Fred, and keep doing it.
My pleasure. It's just about knowing how to live with these things, right, and make the most of it, because they do work well if you set it up correctly. But even then, so I wrote a book, Digital Marketing in an AI World, and it's now 2 years old, so I didn't want to talk about it too much. But one of the things we say, or that I said, was see yourself as like the PPC pilot. The planes that pilots fly are by and large automated, but the reason you put a pilot in is to look for unusual scenarios and know what to do in those scenarios. So it's about monitoring the machine. It's about knowing how to intervene when the machine is doing it wrong. And that's really how you think about yourselves as well. Like, you got this massively complex machine, but you can still steer it.
Right. Okay, let's get into a few questions we've got. First one's from Nikki Kuhlman. So I'm going to summarize it. Basically, if smart bidding is using conversion data from the entire account, does it make sense to move campaigns like display or very different product targets into their own account? Because I guess the theory is that if the conversion behavior for display, which is usually lower than search, could drag down the algorithm or something. So was that clear?
Yeah, that's a really good question about how do you optimize conversion tracking. So I wouldn't be too worried about display versus YouTube versus search and even shopping. And Google is starting to bridge those gaps a little bit better because they sometimes do have different ways of measuring conversions. Right, but so say that you get really low conversion rate on the display network. Google knows that when somebody is doing a search, well, that's not the display network. So they look at a different set of attributes and they make a different prediction from what is actually happening, right? So the display network is dragging down the conversion rate number that you see in your account, but it's not weighing down its ability to predict correctly what's going to happen in a different scenario, which might happen on search. Obviously, then you have conversion actions, right? So if you sell products and you do some lead gen, that could be different conversion trackers, conversion actions, and you can separate those out. And then you can also set those to be associated to certain campaigns. So you don't necessarily have to split out accounts, but you could think about setting different trackers for different campaigns.
Yeah, so
and then there's also kind of the flip side, or one level above that. So if you have multi-account, if you're an MCC advertiser, you can set up conversion actions at that level as well. And so then the data from multiple accounts will all feed back into that conversion action.
And Nikki had a follow-up question, which is kind of the same thing, but what happens if there are two very different conversion actions? Let's say lead gen versus purchase.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where I would then use, definitely have the different conversion actions, and then you can associate those to the different campaigns as you need.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's obviously also the inside the conversion tracking, there's the include in conversions setting. That's the toggle that says whether you use it as part of automations. And then what we see in Optimizer, so we're able to bring in the different conversion actions, either from inside AdWords or from your external data sources. And then we have a rule engine that can have a decisioning process. So it can say, okay, well, for this campaign, we're going to use this conversion action. And if these conditions are met around that, then this is the change we make. And then for this different campaign, we use a different conversion action and we use this data to make a different set of decisions. So it kind of depends on the exact implementation that you want to go for. But yes, absolutely, you don't want to mix them together because they are different. And then we also get into micro conversions, right? So, if the lead eventually could become a sale, right? So somebody signs up for the newsletter, but eventually the goal is to get them to buy something, then it's fine to use those as a multi-stage conversion. But maybe you assign a lower value to the lead itself than to the buying of something. So there's many techniques around that.
Okay. This one was asked in two different boxes here. So this is from David O'Daly. And this is, how does impression share work with broad match under Target CPA? Is it that the more you bid, the more auctions you're eligible for as you're effectively increasing your ad rank?
Yes, exactly. So impression share, that's a great question. I mean, I love the fact that you're even thinking about impression share because we see a lot of advertisers, they turn on smart bidding and they lose sight of impression share. So yes, impression share is a great optimization metric because it tells you if your target CPA or target ROAS is perhaps too conservative to fully get everything you can from those potential customers. So what was it? The specific question was, how does it work with broad match?
And Target CPA?
Yeah, I mean, so we basically use it, we'll say, okay, the other part of the question was, yes, if you raise your targets, if you become more aggressive in your targets, you open up new pockets of potential auctions that you can show up for. So your overall volume will go up and your impression share will become better. So we do look at that as an optimization flag. Basically, if your impression share is too low, but you're still hitting pretty close to your targets, then we say, okay, let's get a little bit more aggressive with those targets and see if, that actually drives incremental conversions that are satisfactory to the small increase in cost that we may be seeing.
Great.
I see a question here
Go ahead.
about get more granular about ads that were triggered within the same ad group. Yeah, so there was like the trending queries thing. So the script, it's on the last slide that I had. So there is a script that will find you trending queries. One thing that's really nice about automation and tools like Optimizer is that you can actually very easily compare date ranges. So Google has this really cool script. It's trending queries or trending keywords. And you can say, find me a keyword that for 4 weeks in a row has slowly been decreasing click-through rate or conversion rate. And these are the things we don't usually pick up on because from 1 week to the next, the decrease may have been so small that we don't see it. But if you look at patterns over multiple weeks, it's actually like, oh, this is concerning that it keeps going down and down and down. You can implement the same sort of like date range versus date range comparison. That's very easy to do with scripts and third-party tools, but it's a little bit difficult to do inside of the Google Ads interface. And again, this then speaks to automation layers, but the specific script you can use, it's on those slides. And I'll show the slides real quick again here, if I may, David.
Let's see.
So
Yeah, you should be.
yeah, if you can screenshot that, then you'll find it's called a trending query script.
We are at the end of time, but Fred, do you have time to stick around for a few more questions?
Yeah, let's do a couple more minutes.
All right.
We have another call to go to.
Let's see. I think this is a very popular question. How can small advertisers leverage setting different conversions and start treating them differently? That seemed like a lot of setup and work up front. And I think you might also address the, low volume challenges of small advertisers and how that might be affected by smart bidding.
Yeah, I mean, so small advertisers, like, you really should thank Google for all the machine learning work they're doing. So basically, when it comes to smart shopping campaigns, there used to be a threshold of how many conversions you needed to have before you could even start using a smart shopping campaign, which is fully automated, as opposed to the manual shopping campaign. Google has removed those thresholds. And literally what they're saying is, we don't need to know anything about your conversion data for us to be able to bid automatically for you. And that's because they can look at your products, they can look at your website. If you're doing lead gen, they can look at all sorts of conditions across the whole spectrum of every advertiser in the world. And the machine learning can already make some pretty decent predictions about what's going to happen. And then as you get more data, of course, about your account, Google can start to weigh that more heavily and take that into account. But yeah, so that's really beneficial, I think, for small advertisers. As far as setting up like multiple conversion actions, just think about the ones that make sense, right? I mean, I don't want you to go crazy with 10 conversion actions, but think about in your business, like what drives engagement down the line. Like, we know that doing webinars gets people to try out the software. We know that writing blog posts tends to, again, have people come back to us. So these might be micro conversions that we track. And in the absence of bigger data about how many people actually sign up, that becomes a good way for us to steer the ship, right? So if we see, okay, well, we were able to drive these people to sign up for the webinar, that is a good behavior that we know generally corresponds to more signups happening. So let's have Google optimize for that behavior. And once that behavior has been scaled up, now we got lots and lots of people watching webinars, and we got lots and lots of people actually buying stuff. Now we can start to focus a little bit more on optimizing for that ultimate goal. But I don't think you necessarily need to have too many of these to see success.
Okay, one more and we'll get you to your phone call, Fred. So this is a common question. What's your opinion on the best number of RSA ads per ad group?
I have that data, but I don't know at the top of my head. Give me 1 second. I believe multiple RSAs. Okay, I've got it in front of me. I'm not going to show it because this is exclusive to SMX Next, which is coming up in November, but I will tell you what we saw. CTR goes up dramatically if you have multiple RSAs in an ad group. Cost per conversion goes down about 25%. And return on ad spend is 80% better. Wow. So yes, use multiple RSAs.
Right. Well, does that argue for 10 or 3? 2. Okay, that's
I believe Google allows 3, but I think we've measured. Actually, we didn't break out the measurement, but I think 3 is overkill. I would start at 2. I mean, even a lot of people aren't doing 2.
Yep. Okay. Thank you so much, Fred. Really great stuff, and we really appreciate your kicking off the series.
My pleasure. Thanks everyone for watching. Have a great weekend.